This is Project Grimfield, Episode 4, Reunited by David Hooker. This audiobook uses AI-generated narration. AI Finn is narrating this story. Chapter 7, Familiar Places. The afternoon bus pulled away, leaving David back on the curb where he had started. He watched the street for a moment, then turned and began the walk home, his hands once again seeking the refuge of his pockets. Inside his house, the silence was absolute. David dropped onto the couch, the only sound in the room coming from the television as he began to flip through the channels. Sitcom laugh tracks, game shows, loud commercials. Each one felt like static against his brain. Click, click. He stopped, stared blankly at the flickering colors, then killed the power. He checked his phone. No notifications, no messages. He refreshed the screen once. Nothing. He exhaled through his nose, a sharp sound of annoyance. Seeking a different kind of noise, David booted up his game console. He slid on his headset and joined an online match. Immediately, the room was filled with the sounds of virtual gunfire and chaotic chatter. "You're trash," a voice crackled through the headset. David stiffened, his posture sharpening.
"Oh yeah?
"Your whole life is trash."
Who you think you talking to?"
The voice snapped back. "You punk," David said, leaning forward. "You think you're so much better than me, but here you are wasting your life, probably because your parents didn't love you enough to give you attention. Yo, shut up. Your whiny voice is annoying." David's jaw tightened until it ached. "Why don't you make me?" he challenged, his voice trembling with a desperate sort of anger. "I beg you to try. I've been waiting a long time to make someone feel my pain." "I'm reporting you," another player chimed in. David let out a bitter mocking laugh. "Why me? What are you, just a pet now? Jumping in to protect your owner?" The voices abruptly cut out as the players left the lobby. The game menu returned to a low, rhythmic hum. David stared at the screen, his breathing heavy and ragged. "I can't stand people," he muttered to the empty room. He reached out and shut the console off. Silence returned. David lay back on the couch and put his earbuds in. He scrolled through his phone until he found a track of ambient sounds, soft wind and distant rain. As the artificial weather filled his ears, the room seemed to settle. He pulled out his nightmare disorder medication, hesitated for a heartbeat, and then took it with a sip of water. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowed, the ambient rain masking the world outside as he drifted toward the sleep he so deeply feared. The fluorescent lights of the Nifton Utilities customer service office hums with a sterile, rhythmic energy. Asia Davis sat at her desk, the headset a permanent fixture of her mid-20s existence. Her face wore a calm, practiced smile, the kind of expression that was more a part of the uniform than a reflection of her mood. "Thank you for calling Nifton Utilities," she said, her voice pleasant and automatic. "How can I help you today?" Her fingers flew across the keyboard with efficient, composed movements. As a supervisor drifted past her cubicle, Asia offered a polite nod without breaking her stride. "Yes, ma'am. I understand the charge," she continued, listening to the voice on the other end. "Let me see what I can do for you." She nodded again, the empathy professionally measured. "I've taken care of that for you. You'll see the adjustment on your next bill." The line went dead. Asia exhaled softly and pulled the headset from her ears. For a fleeting moment, the mask slipped. She rubbed her temples, looking every bit as tired as she felt, though she remained functional, a gear in a well-oiled machine. The sudden vibration of her phone on the desk broke the silence. The screen displayed a name she hadn't expected to see. "Mom." Asia hesitated, the cursor on her screen blinking like a heartbeat. Finally she answered. "Hello?" she asked, her voice quiet and guarded. "Asia, hey, it's me." Deborah's voice crackled through the receiver. Asia straightened in her chair, her shoulders bracing for impact. "What's wrong?" Nothing like that. There was a heavy pause. "My caretaker quit." Asia closed her eyes briefly, the weight of the statement settling in her chest. "I know you're busy. I don't want to be a burden. I just didn't know who else to call." Asia stood up, the cord of her disconnected headset trailing like a tether. She walked toward the window, looking out over the street where life seemed so much simpler. I literally have my life established here," Asia said, her frustration finally slipping through. She turned away from her coworkers, seeking a shred of privacy. "You didn't want me there. You made that very clear, and now all of a sudden I need to come back?" Silence stretched across the miles between them when Deborah spoke again. Her voice was softer, trembling. "I know I haven't been the best, and I don't expect you to want to. I really don't. But I need help, Asia. Please, just consider it." Asia watched the people on the sidewalk below, laughing, living, moving forward. Her expression softened, not yet reaching forgiveness, but settling into a painful conflict. "I'll think about it," she whispered. That's all I'm asking, thank you. Asia ended the call and stood still, the phone heavy in her hand. She looked at the office around her, the life she had built, and felt the invisible line pulling her back to the past. Slowly, she sat back down and slid the headset into place. Thank you for calling Nifton Utilities, she said, the forced calm returning to her voice. How can I help you today? The smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. The transition began in fragments. In one world, Asia began to pack. In another, David was waking up. In his dim apartment, David jolted awake on an air mattress, the vinyl groaning beneath him. The seams were a mosaic of duct tape patches. His chest tightened, his breath coming in sharp, uneven stabs. He gripped his shirt, fighting the panic until a long, familiar sigh escaped him, tired and practiced. Here we go, he muttered. He sat up, his feet hitting the cold floor. He waited until his breath steadied just enough to stand. Across town, Asia was yanking clothes from her closet. She folded them with a sharp, rhythmic irritation before losing patience and shoving a shirt into a duffel bag. Zippers hissed, drawers slammed. She checked her phone, no new messages, and exhaled a sharp, jagged breath. David stood before his open refrigerator. The interior light flickered over rows of energy drinks. He had everything he needed to get through the day, just not enough to make it worth it. He stared at them with a flat, resigned expression. I need to get more drinks, he said to the empty kitchen. He closed the fridge door slowly. Back in her bedroom, Asia zipped her final bag shut. She looked around the room, clean, controlled, and suddenly very temporary. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. Asia's car cut through the morning air, moving down the highway toward Flalington. As the trees blurred past, the streets began to look familiar, and her jaw tightened instinctively. Memories flickered through her mind like a bad reel of film, not emotional, just irritating. She remembered the sound of lockers slamming, the overwhelming noise of the hallways, and the way teachers used to talk over her. It was a suffocating routine she thought she'd left behind. A specific flash hit her. Grimfield, standing rigid and cold, his voice echoing from years ago. You're expelled. Unbelievable, Asia scoffed under her breath. She shook the memory off and kept driving. There was no thought of David, only the school, the annoyance, and the past she had fought to escape. As she passed the road leading to Flalington Ridge Middle School, the building appeared in the distance. She didn't slow down, but her eyes flicked toward it for a split second before she forced her gaze back to the road ahead. In a different part of town, David was pulling on a hoodie. He glanced at the empty space in his room, where a real bed should have been, and let out another quiet sigh. He grabbed his keys and stepped out. Chapter 8. Reunion. Asia pulled her car to a stop in front of a modest home. She stepped out, took a deep breath, and adjusted the strap of her bag. She walked to the door and knocked. It was Deborah who opened it. At 55, she was leaning heavily on a walker, her frame smaller than Asia remembered, but her face lit up instantly. Asia. Deborah reached out, and Asia stepped forward into the house. They hugged, an awkward collision at first, that slowly melted into something real. Moments later, they were in the living room. Deborah carefully pushed the walker aside, a look of annoyance crossing her face at the limitations of her own body. I'm happy to help, Mom, Asia said firmly, but I need to say this up front. I'm not dealing with nonsense, and I'm not being treated like a slave. I'm your daughter. Deborah looked at her, the hurt visible in her eyes, but it was tempered by understanding. I'm not going to treat you like that, girl. You know I would do things myself if I could. If I wasn't struggling, I would. Asia's posture softened. I know. I told you, you've got to move more. Exercise. At least try. Deborah sighed, the exhaustion deep in her bones. I know. I'm just exhausted. She paused, looking toward the window. Why don't you go to that cafe down the street? Get me a coffee. Asia nodded. Okay. She grabbed her keys and headed back out. At a nearby convenience store, David moved through the aisles with a singular focus. He grabbed 2 packs of energy drinks without hesitation and brought them to the counter. The cashier, who recognized the regular, didn't even have to look up. Man, drinking this much of this stuff gonna rob you of your sleep. David smirks faintly, a dark shadow in his eyes. That's the point. I hate sleep. The cashier scanned the packs. Sleep's the best thing in the world. David's small smile faded instantly. Not for me. The register beeped. The transaction finished. David gathered his heavy bags, stepped out into the daylight, his head down as he began the walk home. Asia pulled her car into the cafe parking lot and shifted into park. She stepped out into the crisp air, but as she began to walk toward the entrance, she froze. Her eyes locked onto a figure walking past on the sidewalk. He looked familiar, impossibly familiar. Excuse me, she called out. The figure didn't stop. Hey, the one holding the drinks. David kept walking, assuming the voice was directed at someone else. You, yeah, you, Asia shouted. David slowed down, looking confused. He turned around. Yeah, can I help you? Asia stared at him, a wave of disbelief washing over her. The irritation of the morning vanished, replaced by a haunting recognition. This is gonna sound weird, but... Are you David? She took a breath. David Holloway? David's grip tightened on the plastic handles of the bags. In an instant, the memory of the only person he had ever been a genuine friend to flooded his mind. His breath caught in his throat. Asia, he asked, his voice quiet and stunned. Asia's face finally broke into a true smile, one that reached her eyes. Oh my God. David let the bags hit the pavement. They stepped toward each other and crashed into a hug, tight, long, and real. For a moment, the weight of their separate lives vanished, and the world around them simply faded away. The sun beat down on the cafe parking lot as Asia pointed toward the mountain of energy drinks on the ground. Put those in my trunk, she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. We need to catch up. David blinked, the suddenness of the encounter momentarily short-circuiting his brain. Then, he moved fast. Oh yeah. He rushed to the car, leaning over to carefully arrange the cans inside the trunk. He closed the lid with a focused, deliberate click, treating the mundane errand like a mission of vital importance. Behind him, Asia watched his frantic efficiency, a small private smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Inside the cafe, the air smelled of roasted beans and steam. They stood at the counter to order their coffee, David fumbling slightly with his wallet as he navigated the transaction. Once they had their mugs, they retreated to a small table tucked near the window. An awkward silence settled between them, though it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the heavy, loaded silence of two people who had once been close and were now trying to remember how the pieces fit together. David kept glancing at Asia, catching a glimpse of her face before immediately darting his eyes away. His leg bounced a frantic rhythm under the table. Asia, by contrast, didn't look away at all. She studied him with a gaze that was calm, curious, and undeniably warm. So, Asia started, breaking the quiet. How's life going? David stiffened. It's going a bit fine. He forced a small, tight smile and tried to turn the spotlight back on her. What about you? What brings you here? He paused, his voice dropping an octave. I never really knew what happened after, the expelling thing. Asia exhaled slowly, the breath carrying years of weight. My mom didn't want me anywhere near you after that. She started homeschooling me. Said it was for my safety. David nodded, listening intently as she stirred her coffee. But really it was just micromanaging, she continued. Watching my every move. I took online courses, did customer service training. She gave a small, resigned shrug. I wasn't really allowed to go outside without her supervision. That's why I could never come over. David's shoulders slumped, his posture deflating. Dang. He looked down at the table. I really made it hard for you. No, David, Asia said firmly, shaking her head. I made it hard for myself. I didn't have to do what I did. She waited until he looked up, meeting his eyes directly. I wanted to. David managed to hold her eye contact, though only for a fleeting second. Eventually, I saved up enough money to move to Nifton, she added. David's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Nifton? That's expensive. Yeah, but it was nice. Asia went quiet for a moment, her eyes drifting to the window. Then my mom got into a wreck, hurt her back. It wasn't severe, but she neglects her health. Skipped physical therapy. She stared into the depths of her cup. I told her she'd have to tough it out. Life was torture staying with her. Listening to her brag about being such a good mother, while telling me how much I don't try for her. David winced. Almost sounds like my parents. He let out a small, bitter laugh, but the sound seemed to startle him. He quickly cleared his throat. I guess you're just visiting then. Asia shook her head. No, David, I'm staying. Instantly, David's eyes lit up. You are? My mom's caretaker quit, she explained. She called me to be her in-home care provider. David processed this for a second. So, like a live-in provider? Asia laughed, the sound bright and sharp. Absolutely not. Living with my mother again? That's not happening. David joined her, a genuine laugh finally breaking through his nerves. Okay, good. I'll use the money to rent a place around here, Asia said. David nodded, a steady smile finally taking hold. The conversation drifted into a lull before Asia asked softly, What happened to your parents? The shift was instantaneous. David gulped, his posture changing completely, as if we were bracing for a blow. They passed away. Asia's face dropped. Oh my God, David, I'm so sorry. It's fine. Really, he said. His voice clipped as he looked away toward the street. Just don't worry about it. Asia nodded, respecting the boundary he'd drawn. She searched for a way to bring him back. One thing I always noticed about you, no matter how old you get, your face still looks 12. David snorted, the tension breaking. Well, thanks. I always thought I looked like a lonely 25-year-old man with insomnia. Asia smirked. Nah, you look like a 12-year-old who wants to be a lonely 25-year-old man with insomnia. David laughed harder this time. I didn't know you had a weird sense of humor. David, we were both weird, she reminded him. That's why we were friends. Time slipped away as they sat by the window. The cafe grew quieter, the afternoon sun deepening into the amber hues of evening. At the front door, a staff member flipped the sign to closing in 1 hour, remained anchored to their chairs, still talking. Do you remember how mean Mr. Grimfield was? Asia asked. David stiffened automatically. Yeah, wow, you still get that way when you hear his name. What way? David asked defensively. I don't get a way. Yes, you do. You tense up. David exhaled, his shoulders dropping. It's just, I remember his punishments vividly. So do I, Asia agreed. He was a horrible teacher. A silence fell over them, more contemplative than before. David looked at her, the question he'd carried for years finally surfacing. I always wondered why you stuck up for me. Asia thought about it, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I saw me in you, a scapegoat. She met his eyes. At school I was passing most of the time. At home I was treated like I was failing. David tried to lighten the heavy mood, offering a lopsided grin. Wow, and here I was thinking I had charm. Asia smirked. If charm means staring at me and blushing every 5 seconds, then yeah, you had plenty. David laughed, and this time Asia joined him. It was the kind of shared, easy laughter that hadn't existed for either of them in a very long time. The cafe lights dimmed with a finality that felt like a door closing on the day. Inside, the click of the lock echoed in the quiet space before Asia and David stepped out into the cool evening air. The streetlights hummed above them, casting long amber shadows across the pavement as they walked toward the car. The drive was quiet. Inside the cabin, the dashboard glowed softly, illuminating Asia's profile as she steered through the hushed streets. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only comes from shared hours and unspoken understanding. Do you remember when we first met? Asia asked, her voice cutting through the hum of the engine. David smiled faintly, the memory surfacing through the fog of his usual exhaustion. Yeah, I think I said hi like 3 times. You kept starting sentences and then just stopping, she teased. David let out a dry chuckle. You weren't much better. You nodded a lot. I didn't know what to say, Asia admitted, glancing at him. You looked terrified. I was, David whispered. They shared a small, rare laugh as the road stretched ahead and the sky brewed to a deeper black. When Asia pulled up to David's house, the structure looked dim and tired, mirroring the man leaning against the passenger seat. He hopped out to grab the energy drinks from the trunk, the plastic crinkling in the stillness. Thanks for today, David said, lingering by the window. Anytime. Asia paused, her expression softening. Good night, David. Night, Asia. He watched her taillights shrink into red pinpricks before they vanished entirely. Entering the house, he dropped the drinks on the living room floor. I'll put these up tomorrow, he muttered to the empty room. This concludes Project Grimfield, Episode 4, Reunited by David Hooker. This audiobook uses AI-generated narration. AI Finn is narrating this story.